I've long been a massive fan of Bethesda games, spanning from Fallout to Skyrim and more. I've enjoyed almost every game I've played of theirs, no joke. So naturally, hearing that Starfield would be Bethesda's take on a space RPG, that got me interested. Very interested. In fact, after hearing all of the details from the Starfield Direct and from before, I was actually pretty excited. Though I knew to keep my expectations to a relatively middle ground, as disappointments are all too common in any entertainment-related industry, I was hoping deep down that I would fall in love with Starfield the same way I fell in love with Skyrim. And here we are today. I've been playing Starfield for a few days now, sinking tons of hours into it and frying my brain to bits doing so, and I've realized that I now have enough fuel in my ship to make this review and give it the justice it deserves. Starfield is a game that, I have to say, did not really exceed any expectations. It didn't blow me out of the water or change my life. It didn't really fill me with that exact same wonder I felt upon entering the world of Skyrim or even Fallout New Vegas. It didn't really strike me as being a revolutionary game, but Starfield is expansive and impressively so. And there's just so much hidden content in this game that it really is something that needs a lot of hours just to get through. So, knowing all of this, is Starfield amazing or just average? Starfield is a game that Bethesda has been working on for a long time now, and after their most recent release that they published being that of Redfall, you could say that the pressure was on for Starfield to deliver. And I mean, there was a lot of pressure on Starfield. Bethesda has been known for masterpieces like Skyrim and Fallout, so they needed to meet the expectations of fans who have been ravenous for the next Elder Scrolls game. Instead of fantasy or post-nuclear apocalypse, Bethesda went to the stars for Starfield. I want to start this review off with the plot, because as a teller of stories myself, plot is vital and essential to the core of a story-driven RPG. Starfield is a game about you, a miner on a planet. Your supervisor Lynn tells you to go deeper into the caverns you're mining out of, and you find a strange piece of metal. You touch this giant metal sheet and ascend in a strange, almost religious experience. Upon waking up from this, you get to design your character. It's pretty similar to how Fallout New Vegas started you off with a doctor's office and your character creator. It's a very classic and similar feel you get with Bethesda games. The character creator is expansive and full of different options for anything from your eyes to your jaw. You can pretty much go as crazy as you want with this part. There are a lot of combinations and options for you to pick, so it does serve well in this aspect. It was a bit confusing to navigate at first, but once you get the hang of it, it's really cool. Also, don't worry if you don't like the way your character looks later on down the line. You can go to things called enhancement clinics and you pay about 500 credits to change your appearance whenever you want. This means literally anything in your appearance as though you just entered the character creator. I believe the only thing you can't change would be your genetic ID. You can also make your own custom name, and this robot companion you have named Vasco will actually say your name, which is pretty neat. After you leave the character creator, you're introduced to Barrett, and then you have to fight a bunch of Crimson Fleet pirates. After that, you're told to take Barrett's ship and then head to New Atlantis, where you're introduced to Constellation, a team of spacefaring explorers who want to explore the possibility of more artifacts existing out there in this vast universe of 1,000 explorable planets. All jokes aside, the plot itself is actually pretty basic, and after playing through a ton of the side quests, I found myself almost forgetting about the main quest lines. In a way, they weren't as interesting or as engaging as the side quests, but more on that later. The vast majority of the missions in the main questline feel very basic, as after you meet Constellation, several missions force you to go to new planets in search of the artifacts. Those missions consist of you going to a planet, running a bunch to the anomaly, and then floating into some strange star-shaped light beams so you can obtain the next dragon shout. Wait, Sorry, wrong game. I meant the next gravity power, or whatever they're called in Starfield. There are approximately 19 main quest missions, and to play them, you'll probably need about 20 hours. But to be honest, about 20 hours into my playthrough, I had barely touched part of the main quest. And this is something I would say is a pretty neat thing about most Bethesda games. You can go tons of hours of playtime without really touching the story. If you don't want to stick to a new quest line, you can switch up and go for another. It makes your playthrough much more directed by you, which is something that I personally love about Bethesda's quest trails. The main quests tackle some philosophical issues, I suppose, but it's a little more linear and set in stone, and some decisions you make will determine things like what crew members survive or not. If you've played Mass Effect, this is really similar to that. Personally, I veered off course pretty quickly from the main story in my playthrough. I went from the UC Vanguard to joining the Crimson Fleet, but actually took a different route than the prescribed way of doing it. I ended up attacking UC Sysdef, which made me their enemy, but it got the attention of the Crimson Fleet, and I became a full-fledged space pirate.
Who's laughing now?
Which I have to say has been one of the most interesting parts about this game thus far. You can join the Freestar Rangers too if you want to be a bit of a space cowboy, but it's not limited to just these things. You can go to a random place and pick up a new quest line. I actually did just that on Neon when I picked up a quest line to convince a merchant to stop paying extortion money to a security officer. It was a pretty neat little thing you could do, but it did add more to the overall sprawling universe that Bethesda created. On New Atlantis, I picked up a questline about getting some super exotic and expensive coffee beans for this eccentric rich guy. I thought that was an interesting one too. Going through the main missions, you have a good amount of range on what decisions you want to make. You can either be a good person who chooses the diplomatic way out, or you can be a rough and aggressive mercenary who just wants to pull the trigger and get some quick cash. Your decisions impact how your crewmates react to you, and they impact the way others see you. My betrayal of Sysdef caused the Crimson Fleet to find me interesting, which is something that I would say was pretty cool.
Who's laughing now?
The main story is not really the place where your decisions make all that much of an impact though. The side quests are really where the decision systems shine because you can really react to things so differently and change the outcome dramatically. You can solve conflicts between people, you can hunt down war criminals, you can become a pirate hunter or a pirate. It's your own design based off of what you decide to react to and in what fashion you do that. Honestly, I did think that the main story was pretty cut and dry, but the side missions and subplots were really where the writing was at its best. I thoroughly enjoyed most of the side stories I worked with, and I liked how you could join factions and go along with so many different quest lines. I still wish the main story was just a bit more compelling though. I don't want to spoil the story too much, but I would honestly say that if you play this game soon, go play the side missions and focus on those more and then finish the main quest. That way you'll feel much more fulfilled. That's just my suggestion though. You may want to sit down for this section because I have a lot of things to say about the gameplay of Starfield and it's gonna be a bit harsh, to be honest. I'll be upfront here, I was not a fan of the gameplay elements of Starfield. The gunplay was quite lacking for a game released in 2023, which honestly is not really a good thing because the game is literally based mainly around gunplay. There were just so many weapons with so many different types of ammunition, and you couldn't see how much ammunition was in your guns in the inventory, so you basically need to cycle through each weapon in your inventory to find one that you may have ammunition for. Additionally, the enemies are actually pretty hefty bullet sponges for a long time. They are not like in Souls games where the difficulty design is methodical or at least engaging for the mind. The enemies in Starfield are just pure frustration. They're quite terrible at detecting you sometimes and quite amazing other times, making for some very inconsistent AI. Along with this, the bullet sponge nature of the enemies and the lack of availability of the types of ammunition you need, but somehow all the types you don't need, makes for a very frustrating shooter experience. Since there are so many guns and there are so many ammunition types, you don't really know which gun contains what type of ammunition. Then you go to pick up some ammunition, but you don't know if your gun is using that ammunition or not. And I think you may have gotten my point by now. I honestly thought about starting to keep a written log of which guns use what ammunition type, but I feel like that should be unnecessary because the game should have much better systems in place for this issue. The melee honestly felt more effective than the gun sometimes, but in general, the frustration I felt dealing with the guns was just really annoying. The thing is, my issue with the gameplay is that it's not really advanced at all. We have such amazing technology and capabilities in our current year, and so many games are coming out with advanced movement, gunplay, and more that it makes Starfield's gameplay pale in comparison, which is very noticeable. In other words, Starfield feels outdated on this front. Though I will say that using the guns themselves is quite alright, it's not so bad to use them, just annoying to keep track of them and their ammunition. Another point of contention I had with the movement was the encumbered system that Starfield had. Yes, I know that Skyrim made it so that you couldn't sprint upon carrying too many items. Yes, I know that Bethesda has done this before and that you can't just have an unlimited amount of things on you at all times, but sometimes it gets annoying very quickly. You just want to carry a few items on you, but the weight seems to set you back from doing so on far too many occasions. It would sometimes force me to drop stuff mid-mission just so that I could sprint, which made it very annoying to deal with. I know it's quote-unquote realistic to not be able to carry too much stuff in real life, but I mean, this is a video game. I don't expect that much realism from a game about running around the galaxy to find religious alien artifacts or whatever. Many of the NPC interactions also caused some annoyance in the gameplay for me. I'll give you a few examples. On many occasions, you can persuade, attack, or just use a different route to get through some things. That's cool and all, but for example, using the attack feature causes pretty much every security NPC that's not even in your relative vicinity to try and attack you. It doesn't make any sense, and the AI for the police in this game feels worse than other games I've played out there for sure. Also, the persuade feature got pretty old pretty quickly. It was just, I quickly realized, a way to skip through some gameplay, but the persuasion was inconsistent at best, and the limited amount of turns didn't really help out in regards to some of the decisions in place. Also, because we have bizarrely morally inconsistent NPC companions, it makes a lot of decisions very annoying to make. I'll get into this aspect a little later in this video though. Health is also very limited and hard to work with, and that does not help with bullet sponge enemies. I recommend leveling up your weapons mastery because this does help with that sponginess, but still, I found this point to be irritating to work with. However, I wouldn't say that it has such egregiously terrible gunplay that I could not or would not play it at all, and that I hated the game and its entirety. No, it wasn't so bad, it just wasn't the best FPS or third-person shooter combat I've ever dealt with. Ship combat isn't the best, to be honest. I didn't really enjoy it that much, and it gets boring pretty quickly. I felt like it was one of the weaker points of the combat in the game. It was just limited and not very fun. Not much else to say there. All this being said, the gameplay is fine and dandy for the most part. Let me put it at this, it won't ruin the game for you or anything like that. There are a few companions you meet throughout Starfield that can join your crew and work alongside you on your ship. The problem is that I wasn't a huge fan of most of them. Vasco is cool and all, seeing as he is a robot. Also, if you select the Adoring Fan trait, you can add the Adoring Fan to your crew. This is just something I thought was pretty funny personally. For the most part, you have the main ones, which are Sarah, Sam, Andreja, and Barrett, who are the characters you meet that are the most fleshed out compared to other Starfield NPCs. However, I really wasn't pleased with the overall selection. The characters were pretty bland and boring, and I wasn't very interested in them as companions. Andreja was pretty cool though, I'll be honest. But some of them, like Sarah and Sam, didn't have much going for them, and they were relatively shallow in their depth, especially with their moral compass, which was just completely off. For example, Sam Coe is a single dad and basically a space cowboy. He hates whenever you do something even remotely violent, which becomes pretty annoying really fast. Additionally, there were many circumstances that his reaction made no sense to. I'll give you an example here. There was a side mission I did for the Crimson Fleet where I had to go to Neon. At the end of this mission, the character that helped me asked for a cut of the money. I paid her 2,000 credits because I didn't want to spend too much money. Then Sam got annoyed because somehow that wasn't enough for the trouble we put her through. I really don't see why I should pay up like 9,000 credits to this random person for Sam to be pleased. It's just an annoying thing to deal with because if the companion gets just a bit angry at you, they can ditch you to fend for yourself, and then they want to have a conversation about how what you did was mean and that's bad and you're not doing good for Constellation and blah blah blah. I found myself mentally comparing the companions in this game to another game like Mass Effect, which featured some of my favorite NPC companions of any RPG game I've played. But the thing is, the characters in Mass Effect felt like they had much more depth and personality to them. They were much more interesting and didn't really react with such a flawed moral compass. Additionally, the Mass Effect characters didn't just ditch me when they didn't like a certain decision I made, and they also understood that difficult decisions that may not be so ethical are just part of being a leader. It's funny to me because in my first playthrough, I joined up with the Crimson Fleet and was a space pirate, but it seemed like the characters didn't take that into account. They all just expected me to act with the pinnacle of ethics, but I'm literally a space pirate. It just feels so unnatural and unrealistic to have them react in the way that they do. I just think that they feel too shallow compared to that of other RPG games I've played and compared to other Bethesda games. There just lacks that extra pizzazz that would have made them more engaging to interact with. There is a romance system with only 4 characters though, which I think is pretty abysmal. I was hoping there would be a broader selection of romanceable characters like in Skyrim, but I guess not. You can't really act how you want when the characters don't really like that, and it makes for an overall watered down experience if you want to play as a bit of a bad guy. You can go around and ask others to join your crew, but you can't romance them. There will probably be a mod for this one day though. I have to say, if there is one thing I loved about Starfield a ton, it had to be the expansive and impressively extensive world building done in this game. There are so many little details and elements strewn about in the world that you can't help but feel just slightly full of some wonder. In Starfield, Earth is long dead, but the rest of the galaxy is vibrant and flourishing with life. However, this is only limited to some planets, because for the most part, the 1,000 boasted explorable planets are mostly very barren, empty, or repetitive. I chalk this up personally to being as a result of the procedural generation, as it's easy to have 2 planets be basically the same when they are randomly generated from a pool of presets. You can only explore so much of Starfield's universe before it becomes overwhelming. This is a similar issue I had with a game like Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which featured one of the biggest, if not the biggest, maps in Assassin's Creed, but it was mostly empty, barren, and not very interesting to explore. I will say that there are some very interesting planets in Starfield though, and some of them feature some really cool cities and surfaces. But the unfortunate aspect of this is that these planets are few and far, with the majority of the explorable worlds being quite bland or very similar to the others. But the scope and size of Starfield's universe makes this the reality, which is why I usually do not think too much into game or map size. If the map is big but empty and useless, then it makes the explorability factor go down. It's kind of like marginal utility in a way. You keep exploring planets with the first few times being really exciting, but eventually it gets boring, and your excitement and satisfaction in exploring the planets goes down. But I will say that Neon had to be my favorite city. It was a very cyberpunk style city, and it was almost something like you'd see in Star Wars. New Atlantis was not my most favorite city, but I did think it looked pretty cool and had that nice city feel to it that is also at the center of innovation throughout the universe. Aquila also had some interesting aspects to it, and it reminded me of something you'd see in Fallout probably. I can tell that Bethesda did a good job at designing their new IP, and seeing as it's been 25 years since they ventured from their traditional stuff, it's definitely impressive to see how far they've come in that aspect. I will say though that the universe of Bethesda Starfield isn't really there purely for exploration in the way that a game like No Man's Sky is. Bethesda's game is first and foremost an RPG RPG set in an open world, but the open world has just been replaced with an open universe, so to speak. The overall feel of Starfield is more akin to Mass Effect, with a story-focused gameplay style rather than just exploration. There are many planets that are just devoid of all life. They do have something on them, but they don't necessarily have life as in human life. You can build outposts on planets too, which is really cool and gives you a bit of a base away from your ship. Crafting resources you get around the world help you make the parts for your outpost as well, which is great. You don't need to build any outposts, but it does help and it's fun. I don't see any reason not to do so, honestly. However, these surface maps on planets, they're absolutely terrible. You can't even tell what's happening on them. I'm not sure who came up with the design, but they really fumbled on it. It's not visually appealing and it just isn't helpful or informative. Not sure why it's even there if it's not even good. One of the most controversial points of complaint I have seen so far in regards to Starfield is most definitely the loading screens. That's because there is no real space travel or planetary travel in the way that you might have expected. For the most part, you are fast traveling from one place to the next, so you could definitely try to just fly to another planet in the game, but you will be sitting there for hours on end. It just isn't feasible, and there will be a loading screen separating your time from one place to the next. Think of the Mass Effect mass relays or hyperspeed from Star Wars. This is more of what the travel in Starfield is like between systems. And yeah, that bothered a lot of people. Most of the travel in Starfield is split between loading screens, and I guess that it can seem a bit jarring. I mean, even Watch Dogs had the ability to travel in the train without using fast travel, but Starfield's New Atlantis doesn't have that same feature to it. I understand the reason behind it though, because the sheer scope of Starfield is pretty insane when you put it into a relative perspective. I don't see how feasible it is to include real-time space travel between systems or planets the same way that No Man's Sky does. It is much more feasible development-wise, I'd assume, to make it transition via loading screens. Is this as aesthetically pleasing? No, but it is more reasonable for the systems that are dealing with this game. I don't think this should be a point of controversy because it's really not that big of an issue, honestly. Another thing I loved about Starfield has to be the shipbuilding. I would say this feature was probably one of the cooler aspects of the role-playing part of this game. Shipbuilding makes you really feel more immersed in the game and makes you feel like you belong in this vast universe because you can put your own stamp on it. Acquiring ships is also fun as you can steal them like a pirate or buy them legitimately. You can make some pretty cool ships. I've seen a lot on YouTube and the Starfield subreddit of people building ships from Star Wars and Halo, and it's honestly so cool. There are so many parts and pieces you can swap out and really make a pre-made yours or custom build it from the ground up. I think this aspect of Starfield is very strong and I didn't really have any issues with it personally. To be honest, I liked it and I think you'll all have fun with this point as well. I mentioned Outposts earlier, but I feel pretty much the same way about the Outposts that I do the shipbuilding. It's fun, don't see why you wouldn't do it. A lot of Starfield lets you somewhat choose what you do. It allows for you to actually have some say in your character's personality. However, I felt like Starfield wanted you to choose a very specific and certain pattern of behavior, which I honestly found irritating. As a space pirate, you'd think that my character should be out there stealing ships and all that, but this activates the bounty system. And so every planet associated with the faction you happen to attack becomes hostile and wants to get a bounty off of you. By the way, if you've ever played Assassin's Creed Odyssey, it's closely similar to the mercenary system from that game, but at least in Odyssey you could still travel around normally. In Starfield, you can't even land on the surface of the planet until your bounty's paid off. You basically have three options to deal with your bounty. You either pay up and also lose a bunch of stuff, go to jail, or attack them and then that spawns an entire fleet to attack you. It's absolutely irritating and ruins a lot of potential this game has to allow you to actually feel like you're in an RPG. The security AI in this game is very much ridiculous, and they all spawn in at the minute second you decide to do something a bit illegal, and it really makes playing this game a drag because you can't really roleplay in the way that you think you can. Now the workaround is basically go to jail, but you will lose some confiscated items. To avoid that, store those confiscated items in your cargo hold on your ship. However, if you go to jail, you won't have to pay off your bounty, but you'll lose some XP, so be careful about that. Additionally, if you're planning on waging some space piracy or being a space scumbag or whatever, take Vasco with you. He basically just tries to assist you and doesn't care about morality. The adoring fan also just thinks everything you do is awesome, so he's pretty chill. The other characters will basically hate you. I raided and stole a ship from the UC and Sarah Morgan hated me after that, so if you care to stay in the good graces of your crew, be careful who you assign to your ship, or maybe you don't care about how your crew feels, that's alright too. I just think for an RPG, it would have been more rewarding if we had the chance to go all out on a much easier scale. With the current limiting systems put in place, it certainly makes it tough to do anything and everything you want. Of course, it's not that I don't expect consequences for committing crimes, but it would be nice if those consequences weren't so frequent and inconsistently easy to obtain. I know I ripped into this game a bit, but I will say this. Starfield would have been an excellent game in my books had it released a few years ago. Simply put, it's a great game, but it hasn't innovated enough to be an excellent or fantastic game. I think some reviewers were too harsh though. Yeah, the game was mediocre in many things, but I will say that as far as RPGs come, it's overall quite decent. It's not insane or revolutionary, but it's decent. Would I recommend playing it? Yes, 100% I would. Would I recommend playing it for a long time? Yes, because you're gonna need a ton of hours just to scrape the surface of the content of this game. Yeah, the beginning's a bit slow, but once you get past it, the game is great. There's a lot of hidden content in the universe of Starfield, and its expansive nature is very impressive. If you're gonna go into this game with the lens of a critic, you'll find a lot wrong with it. If you're gonna go into this game with the lens of a player and only that, you will find a lot right with it. I think if you want to pick it apart, there's a lot to pick apart. But overall, I would not say that this is a bad game or undeserving of at least some praise. It did a lot of things right, and my many playtime hours show that. Overall, I would not call this game amazing or average. I think it sits in that space in between somewhere of those two adjectives, but I will honestly keep playing it. I think there's just so much I want to do in this game that I feel almost compelled to play it. If I had to give a number, I'd say Starfield is probably a 7.5 out of 10. It's not super amazing to where I'd give it an 8, nor is it meh to where I'd give it a 7. Like I said, it sits in a space between amazing and average. A lot propels it forward, but a lot pushes it back. Is it contender for Game of the Year? Unfortunately, I wouldn't really say so. Starfield stands well on its own, but against the shoulders of games that released this year like Baldur's Gate 3, it's just not quite there yet. But it's still a good game, and if you like Bethesda's works, you'll probably like Starfield too. Would I pay $70 for it though? I honestly would have to say no. I did play this on Game Pass. If you have Game Pass, I would recommend it, but I don't know if I would pay $70 to $100 to play Starfield personally. And with that being said, thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a like and subscribe with notifications set to all so you never miss out on a single upload. Comment below your thoughts on Starfield. Don't forget to check out our website for gaming news, entertainment, and more. The link to that, as well as all of our other important links, are in the description below.